Welcome to Women Who Brand, a podcast that spotlights inspiring women in the creative industry. I'm Alejandra Salazar, founder and CEO of CROING, which is part of the 0.1% of creative agencies founded by a woman. And I'll be your host today. This podcast is part of an initiative of CROING to inspire women in the industry by sharing the journeys and insights of those who are leading the way. Women Who Brand are creative, strategic, and visionary forces in the world of marketing, making an impact in both their role and the industry as a whole, where through campaigns, storytelling, or experiences, they shape how people perceive, interact with, and remember a brand. In this episode, we talk with Charlotte Blank, the U.S. Chief Marketing Officer at Jaguar Land Rover North America. With her background in psychology, she spoke about the importance of spending time understanding your audience. She said there's never too much information about the people you are trying to reach. And I couldn't agree more. We also spoke about the importance of experimenting, of marketers acting like scientists to find what actually resonates with their audience. We talk about the rebranding of Jaguar and how Miami is such an important city for them. And it was so inspiring overall. I'm sure you will enjoy it as much as I did. So let's welcome our next woman who brand, Charlotte Blank. Welcome, Charlotte. So
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Alejandra. Looking forward to our conversation.
Of course. Thank you for joining. Charlotte is the U.S. Chief Marketing Officer at Jaguar Land Rover North America, one of the world's premier manufacturers of luxury sedans, sport cars, and SUVs. I'm sure you know it. Charlotte spent 15 years driving consumer psychology initiatives and global branding in media and automotive, holding global marketing roles at brands like General Motors, for example. I had the pleasure of meeting her early this year at South by Southwest during a panel hosted by the Female Quotient, and you shared their insights and experiences as a CMO, and I was really, truly inspired. Charlotte is one of the few women I know in the automotive industry, which is a space that's long been male-dominated, so seeing a powerful female leader like you was really inspiring, and that's why I invite you to our podcast, Women Who Brand. So let's get started with the interview. First, I know you have a strong background in psychology and a real passion for understanding consumer behavior. So what inspired you to take that path into marketing, and how do you feel about your current role?
Good question. And it's not as uncommon as you'd think amongst marketers, at least the just general passion for what makes people tick, I think is really what drives so many people to the marketing and branding world. I do have like a little more of a heavy academic bent in it, I guess, than some. So I describe myself as a marketer by way of psychology. I studied neuroscience in undergrad and just fell in love with it, and went then into the business side, worked for Turner Broadcasting in Atlanta, and found that many people in my department, this sort of innovation think tank, had psychology and neuroscience backgrounds as well. So it was a useful lens to bring to the table when we were talking about, the disruptions underway in media and what's happening and how people are changing the way they consume media and where they consume it. And all of that sort of context really lent itself to, an interest and experience in psychology. I went from there to business school, where I continue to interact with psychologists who work in the business field, and then really leapt from there right into the automotive space, going straight to General Motors, and got to, learn on the ground, I think, like applying this interest in, especially at the upper funnel kind of branding space, what makes someone a Chevrolet guy versus a Ford guy, so to speak, was sort of the ultimate, like, I think, interesting identity purchase. But being in the automotive industry, I came to learn that it's so much more complex than that. There's the initial look at the sort of psychology and identity of a brand, but it's all the way down the funnel. It's the decisions that our retailers make and how we influence the behavior of our retailers through incentive programs, and how people make the decision to buy in the moment is really interesting. So there's no shortage of interesting psychological questions in the automotive space. And then I did have an opportunity between General Motors and Jaguar Land Rover to really develop an in-house applied behavioral science practice at an incentive and reward company called Merits, where I got to sort of build out a practice of research and thought leadership that was all about generating new insights about how academic research in behavioral science can actually be brought to the applied world and make a real difference in commercial decision making.
Love it. Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting. And as you said, like as a marketers, we always need to be connected to how people behave and consume. In my personal experience, I've been living in 7 countries already, and that really gave me a deeper understanding on how cultures are and how people behave, or how they adopt technology, how they adopt social media, how they really interact between each other just by seeing them interact. So I'm sure the moment you start understanding their brains more, the insights pops, and it's like, I mean, I can imagine how I'm not there, but I can imagine how your brain works all the time, because I feel you have many layers when you are reading consumer behavior report or something like that.
True.
So I also read an article where you mentioned that marketing leaders should lead like scientists. And that was really interesting to me. And also you touched a bit about the importance of optimizing global brands message for specific marketers. Recently, I'm really into hyper local campaigns going global instead of global to hyper local, if that makes sense. So I'm interested in understanding what do you think about it, the global to local or local to global, and also to explain me a little bit more about the marketing leaders acting as a scientist.
Yeah, great questions. And they really do go together. It makes me think of a quote from a behavioral scientist I worked with at Meritz, who said that behavioral science is a verb, not a noun. It's more about the way you behave and pulling from the toolkit of science to the decision at hand, whether it's in business or any other field. And to me, that means primarily running experiments, and experiments that are based on a data-driven hypothesis. So we have so much information available to us that can inform an interesting, educated guess, a hypothesis that we think might work if we make a change. And the way a scientist would approach that question about whether making a particular change or trying something actually made a difference, positive or negative, would be to design a properly randomized and controlled experiment. And that practice of experimentation is already pretty widespread in marketing, particularly in digital marketing. To buy media, right, to buy media with a partner like a Meta or Google, for example, means that you're already running A/B tests, multivariate tests, you're optimizing. So that practice is well ingrained at JLR and at most other modern marketing organizations. I think the interesting kind of next frontier there is the question of what is it that you're testing? Is it something that's just sort of tactical and potentially obvious, like moving an important call to action from the bottom of the page to the top, or trying red versus blue? Where we're starting to learn more interesting nuance is taking a psychological insight from our market research practice and saying, we think that this type of messaging would resonate more with a, say, Defender buyer than a Range Rover Sport buyer, and actually testing that in a controlled way. That's where we're seeing some really interesting results. Wow. And to your question about global and local, that's also a very relevant topic for us as a global organization with luxury global brands. We want to strike that right balance of a consistent, overarching, principled brand platform that transcends market boundaries and sort of resonates with people emotionally all over the world. And some piece of that certainly is dialing up our British heritage, which we know has a lot of appeal around the world. But the question of, to what extent is something that we might tinker with and play up and down in different markets, depending on the context. And there are also just these funny behavioral nuances and expectations that differ between the markets. So a great example recently is in the Range Rover Sport TV campaign that's running now with Theo James. He's driving what we call a Velocity Blue, shade of bright blue Range Rover Sport. And he's in a distinctly English setting, sort of a sprawling country estate, but he's racing around in a really, fun and dynamic way and all over the property. And it turns out that he's ultimately playing fetch with his dog and just kind of having fun in this environment. That's sort of the general simple story that we're telling the spot as a means of showcasing what the car can do by going up and down the steps, etc. But the nuance was the original version of the spot involved a few more scenes where he's going around the property and he's observed by an animal, another character, a woman passing by on a horse, and he kind of has these moments of recognition, or others recognize him going forward through the property. And to our American eyes, we thought, could those be distracting? Are those like taking away from this simple story of what Theo is doing, which was not a perception, by our UK counterparts who created the spot. Wow. So ultimately, we tested a second version that was essentially simplified, removed some of those extra scenes, and just focused a little more on Theo and the car, and found that the simple version dramatically outperformed the one with more scenes in the US. But actually, for UK audiences, the reverse was true. It was really interesting to have some data-driven support behind these, ultimately these stereotypes that informed our subjective discussions about, US audiences needing to just get to the point, be really straightforward, hyper-cluttered, busy landscape, whereas UK audiences have a little more patience for the nuance and the abstract storytelling. It's a little more lean in, so they want a little more depth to the story. So that was great to have the data behind
Wow.
that.
And the data and also the flexibility as a brand to, cut it in that way for one market and for other, like to be able to test, which is what you mentioned at the beginning. I love it because, for example, in the agency, we focus a lot on Gen Z and also US Hispanic and Latin American markets. And it's tremendous. Honestly, it's so different the way a brand will approach us here versus in Latin America, even though we are, for example, I'm originally from Venezuela, but living here and also in the other countries. But everyone that is from a Latin America country and lives in the US, now we want to consume things faster, for example, because it's how you consume here. So even if it's from the same demographic, just by the background of living here more years than if I had lived there forever. It's just so different the way I will connect with a brand. So yeah, it's definitely super interesting. I love it. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, it is. Awesome. So another question. Working with such a large and iconic company, I imagine it can sometimes be challenging to push bold ideas forward or keep creativity flowing. How do you know when an idea or an initiative is good? Do you have a specific process or is more of a feeling in your case?
It's got to be a little of both, right? I think that the data is our friend here, and the more testing and research we can bring to the table to, bolster an intuition that something is a good fit, the stronger the case should be. But, ultimately an organization is a collection of human beings, who are driven by emotional decision making. So it would be naive to think that, in any field, let alone in marketing and other creative fields, that you could show up with a spreadsheet and say,
100%.
This one's the winner. So it's, it's all of the classic best practices and tricks and techniques to understand, the motivations of all of our stakeholders. And there are many, in a big global organization, we have many stakeholders at the table, and we have to balance multiple important goals. That the ultimate that all marketers deal with is short-term sales, long-term brand building.
Of course.
Try not to make those conflict, but often those involve making decisions with trade-offs. So it's complicated, but it's always like anything else, a mix of art and science, I'd have to say.
Love it. Love it. Thank you for that. Also, I have another question. So now you're in a role like you're the CMO of this huge company. I did that comment because I guess it's easier for you now to make your voice and creative ideas heard. I don't know how your process went, but I would love to know how, if you had a process or how was your experience on making sure your voice and creative ideas were here from the beginning of your career to today, especially focusing on the parts on the automotive part of your career, which I feel, it's different.
I think having a little bit of a personal brand around psychology and data, it helps to diffuse what could otherwise be a subjective debate. I like this, I don't like this, this is weird, I know I like it. It's easy to get into those kind of fruitless discussions when you don't have something tangible to grab onto. So I think I started slowly just listening and building relationships and understanding different people's styles and just kind of getting people excited about psychology, which is easy to do. When you come in with just some cool nuggets of insight, look what we uncovered. Look at this interesting fact about our audience. And look, we tested it and it validated it, proved out. And people are like, oh, that's cool. Because like we said, it's, it's what draws many people into marketing. So I think just building a common language and interest in always testing, always researching, always trying and experimenting, and let's let the data inform our decisions. And that always gives us a place to go back to, when we have a particular agenda that might be different from others who are owning the decision.
Love that. And I feel that it's also coming from the testing and experimenting side of things. I feel it's a little bit also humble because you might be sure you have this big instinct. And it happens to me a lot with the US Hispanic community, for example. Brands come and expect me to know everything, like how the audience will react just because I'm part of the community. But the community is super complex as well. It's not that they have my specific background. So any challenge I have, I need to actually go and learn and try and test. So, and I feel in marketing, sometimes you need, or people try to show us like, I'm sure about this and this is the way. And I love how you portray it in a way like, look, we're testing, we're experimenting. And that's actually more honest because it is true.
Yeah.
Love it.
I'm just as guilty of being so sure based on my intuition. And then I have to eat crow, as they say. And I've been wrong many, many times. And it's fun when that happens, when we say, oh, all right, I was wrong. You're right. And then, we have a good relationship underneath it also.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. So Charlotte, now I want to talk a little bit about the the Jaguars rebrand. At CROING, we have a lot of conversations with our clients, especially the ones that have legacy, around rebranding, how to target new audiences while staying true to that legacy. Because sometimes you do it softly, it might go, unnoticed, but if you go hard, it might make some people uncomfortable, or it's challenging. At the end of the day, my opinion is that you can avoid evolution, because it's like trying to avoid AI. Sure, I mean, you can be against, but technology, I mean, things happen, things evolve. We evolve as human beings. So being against change is something natural, but at the same time, it just doesn't make sense for humanity, because it's where we are all doing every second, right? Evolving. So Jaguar's rebrand went viral, and I think it's because it was unexpected, minimal, powerful, all at once. And I know the rebrand is part of your larger reimagine strategy, and I know it also has purpose into it. So I would love to hear your perspective on it. How did it feel for you to take that leap with such an iconic brand, and how did you navigate everything that came with it? The reactions, the conversations, the attention. How do you feel now? Like, what's your point of view? I'm super interested about it.
Yeah, there's a lot there. That was a whirlwind of a quarter, I would say. That was, your point about balancing heritage and evolving is relevant for all of our brands, each of whom has, many, many years of storied history and prestige and legacy. And we want to honor that and kind of grow around it over time, particularly for our Land Rover SUV brands, Range Rover Defender, Discovery, which have, sort of a core group of enthusiasts who are familiar with the heritage and we can kind of grow and expand. Jaguar's a different situation where it's been going through multiple iterations over the past few decades, and now is the time to make a major dramatic transformation of the brand, a complete relaunch to go forward into the future. That segment is challenging. The, sports cars, electric cars, ultra premium brands. There's really not a lot of room to appeal to everyone. We have to have a really strong, specific stance about who we are. And ultimately, the Jaguar rebrand is about a return to our roots of being originals and copies of nothing. And that phrase, even to be a copy of nothing, is from the early days of Jaguar. And when it really stood out as an incredibly iconic brand like no other, it had really bold design language and was like nothing you'd ever seen. And that at its very core is what the new Jaguar brand will be about. And everything about the product is new, really striking. We've only shown the concept so far. We haven't yet revealed what the production vehicle will be like, but I can say that it's similar in design. Some of this really bold kind of neck-breaking design, which you either love or hate, and that's by design, will come through in the saleable vehicle. So we want it that way. Our chief creative officer said some will love it now, some will love it later, and some will never love it. And that is by design. So the car really kind of changed the conversation. I think the really interesting question for marketers was like, what happened in the week before that, where this teaser video went out just in one organic post on our global Twitter handle to just kind of give the world a little wink that like something very different is coming. There's no car in this spot at all. It's just a new logo, a new vibe, a new brand world, and everything's going to be different. And we certainly intended to be provocative, but we did not expect that level of reaction. So that was pretty dramatic and intense. And personally, it was challenging, for many of us to get like such a like visceral reaction from so many people. But we revealed the concept car globally in the United States. We happened to do it in Miami at Art Week in Miami in early December. And when the car came on stage, it kind of clicked for people. It sort of put it all into context, and the car looks awesome and is as bold and striking and unexpected as the campaign implied it would be. So it really changed the conversation. And since then, we've held on to one of the design concept vehicles stateside while the other one went over to Europe and made some other appearances at Paris Fashion Week, some other really iconic venues. Here in the States, we activated at NBA All-Star Game in San Francisco last month. And just last night, actually, we hosted an incredible party in Miami on the rooftop of our North Dade retailer, which has this incredible city view and all kinds of celebrities. DJ Khaled showed up, we did all these great, and it's starting to feel at home, like we're kind of striking the right balance of maintaining the core promise of the brand, which is championing originality and being unique and showcasing your individual sense of style and being very bold and flashy and loud about it. And we found that was a real hit at the NBA All-Star Game, where we did a play on the hallway walk where the players kind of show off these really unusual and fantastic outfits. And then last night in Miami, which is just like the ultimate ultimate kind of city for the new Jag brand. So
it was my question. So why Miami? I mean, it's an important city for me and for the community that I serve. So I was wondering why Miami.
Yeah, Miami is actually a top market for many of our brands just based on the demographics, honestly.
Love it.
High household income, culturally ambitious and relevant, like exciting and dynamic environment, but especially for Jaguar, which we're finding, the psychological research on those who identify and resonate with the concept vehicle, even independent of the messaging around it, indicates, highly status conscious, highly fashion oriented, really expressive and wanting to showcase their individual style. A lot of the traits that we all know and love about Miami very much embody the new Jaguar brand. So
love it.
Yeah, it's at home there.
Oh my God, thank you for sharing all this. It's super valuable and I know our audience will appreciate it a lot. So thank you honestly for sharing. So now we're moving to almost the end of the podcast. This is a quick fire round. I will ask you a few questions. You say whatever comes to your mind. It's like 5 or 6. Are you ready?
Fun.
Awesome. So let's go. Commercial spot or social media?
Commercial. It's cool.
Who creates the brand? The people or the team?
That's tough.
And when I say people, I mean audiences, of course.
The audience. I'm going to say the audience.
Okay. In terms of content, user generated or studio level?
Studio level.
Influencer collab or community content?
Influencer collab.
Love it. Last one. SUV or sport car?
SUV.
Love it. Thank you. So to close out this episode, Charlotte, I will ask you 2 more questions. First, what does it mean to you to be a woman who brands? And what advice would you give to a woman in the creative industry?
What it means to me to be a woman who brands is to be, a woman who shows up at the table and isn't afraid to speak her voice and to use every tool at her disposal to be heard and to influence the conversation. And my advice would be that you can never learn too much about your customer or your target audience. Go as deep as you can and use every toolkit that you have available to you, from the qualitative to the quant. Keep asking why, keep going a level deeper. There's no such thing as just too much knowledge about who you're going after.
What a powerful advice. Thank you so much, Charlotte, for spending this time with me and for sharing all your insights and expertise. And to all women who brand, listening or reading, remember, your voice matters and your creativity has the power to inspire and lead. Until next time, ciao.